Welcome back, everybody, to another Baseline Show office hours today.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So today we'll just keep it light. I know we've had a good lineup of guests in the last few weeks, and hopefully we'll continue in the next upcoming weeks. And for now, we'll talk about what's going on in the baseline world, including the main work going on with BRI3, also known as the Simple Reference Implementation, and how that work will lead into the other roadmap items for this year that are being mapped out within the technical steering committee and other bodies in the community. So with that, Keith and Yoav, could you tell us what's going on in the current milestone and show us some code and the actual decisions that are being made in the implementation at this stage?
Yes, definitely. The kind of what is milestone 4 and where it's at and what its purposes are was covered in the General Assembly that we had, I think 1 or 2 shows ago. But essentially, milestone 4 is all about kind of finalizing the use case as well as the ZKP components of the of kind of getting through that use case and having a end-to-end test that can sort of verify all of those things, that all of the proofs are generated and kind of being stored accordingly within the happy path test case. So I think I will hand it off to Keith, and he can kind of show off some code that's been pushed up since then in PRs, and we can kind of discuss some decision making that went into maybe architecture or design, things of that nature.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen and show you guys the GitHub. So let me know whenever you can see my screen. Yeah,
you're good.
All right, so here I'm already on the pull request page into the baseline repo. Looks like we have 5 different PRs right now. I think 4 of them are related to BRI3, and probably all of them are milestone 4-ish. So let's just take a look from the top down. We have Biswashri, who's working on the ZKP component, implementing the ZK circuit right now. She's done part 2. So if we go ahead and take a look at the PR that she's made, the description is this adds documentation and some kind of initial script commands required to set up Snark.js circuit. So one of the things that we discussed in the last larger meeting for the BRI3 group, including the SRI use case that we've kind of mentioned, as you all said in the previous General Assembly, is what type of ZK library, which ZK library would be using. And the decision came down to between NARC and Circom Snark.js. For the purposes of the first version of BRI3, Snark.js and Circom are sufficient and generally easier to implement because BRI3 already exists in a TypeScript form. Using NARC, which is a Go implementation of a proving system, we'd have to either use some kind of form function interface, a separate service, kind of so on and so forth. I believe Biswashi actually describes that inside of her PR. So let's take a look. One of the things we like to see when we're doing these PRs are the number of files changed are kind of smaller. We try to limit these kind of smaller changes so it's easier for the maintainers to kind of get through their own work and look through the work changes. So if you notice, she's not making a full PR, even though she has all of the work done for the ZKP component. She's not making a full PR to say, hey, here's 20 something files with each 100 lines of code or hundreds of lines of code that you have to look through and make sense of. The reasoning behind this is very simple. It's easier to understand. What makes that kind of so important as we build out BRI3 is the components are very kind of special or unique in their implementation. A ZK component, a Merkle tree component, and we don't expect all the developers to be familiar with these concepts, especially under the hood. So having them come in and be able to review them in kind of a more succinct and kind of precise manner helps with understanding. So remember, this PR was particularly just about adding in some documentation. It is part 2, so she has already added in, part 1 of the ZK components, which we can look back at in a second if we have time. So we look here, very easy stuff. She's added into the get ignore, the powers of tau ceremony here that's going to be generated for the zero knowledge keys. She's given a kind of a full walkthrough of, what we've decided to use, in this case, Circom and Snark.js. And along with those notes, some reasoning as to when we were deciding which one to use. If you see here that she names, NARC, and although it's 5 to 10 times faster and gives sightings for that, that we decided to use instead Snark.js. So we've actually even included that inside the repo, some of the logic behind the decisions we're making, especially when it comes to those kind of pain points inside BRI3, for example, ZK. She also gives a ZK component specific, install and kind of spin up process. So one of these things that we've done is that whenever we have these special components, we're not just jamming everything into the one top level README, right? The top level README will get you going on the top level for the repo itself, but for some of these specialized components like the ZK one or the NATS messaging server, it each has their own README, so everything's kind of modularized and separate. From there, you can see she's added in, necessary modules into the package JSON, and she's already generated the ptau.sh here. And so it is, very, very succinct, right? There's not many files here that she's added in. It's easy to follow if you go back to part 1 and see what she's done and go to part 2 and then combine that with the readings and like Circom and Snark.js. And, it's very easy to kind of follow what she's doing. Let's take a look at another one real quick. We have removing remaining storage mocks. So this has been kind of a line of a couple PRs that Stefan Scosito has made into the repository. This one is a bit larger. The reason behind that is that the first 1 or 2 that he made to replace the mocks were smaller and more succinct, so that it was easier for us to kind of comment as maintainers and see what he was doing. But once he's reached the 2nd or 3rd and the code that he's implementing has become kind of cookie cutter like, then we tend to allow for kind of a larger change on this level, right? Kind of for the obvious reasons. So if we go ahead and look at some of the changes he's made here, in this file, well, maybe not a one-liner, kind of a 2-liner here. There was an import problem. 2 messages from 2 different Nest.js modules have the same error message, the naming scheme for the error message. So, you can see this was kind of identified by one of the maintainers, like what's going on here? Why do we need this conversion? And we address it very easily. Manik is also part of the BRI3 team. You have 2 different import messages of the same name, so we need to name them. Very simple stuff like this. We can take a look at one of the larger files he's worked in. I think this may be one of them here. So this is one of the actual controller test files, messages controller spec in this case. So spec is a naming system we use for one of our for testing. For test files. So in this case, it's the test file for the message controller. And you can see the replacement here is before we were using these pure like mock storage agents, which were just written by us as, like its own set of functions and collections that would easily mock what storage would look like. And this has been replaced with a actual kind of proper mocking tool, this deep mock proxy here. And so instead of using that message storage agent before each has now been replaced with, actual creation of those BPI subjects, which can later down here be used through the deep mock, right? So we say, okay, here we have the message storage agent, the actual storage agent. We're going to get that BPI message by ID and mock resolve value once. So now we're using the actual deep mocking agent versus some custom kind of put together storage agent in its own file. So that way those files can be deleted and the mocking can be handled by just mocking library. And if we go on through, we can see that there's kind of a very same rhythm to this, that at the top, yes, we did create those initial, before each test, you need these certain amount of new BPI subjects to have access to. You need to make sure that the mock deep is being used inside of the testing, right? And instead of the mock storage agent, we're using these particular values inside all testing. And then once we get to a test, we can just, mock those values that are created. So mock resolve this value once, an existing BPI message. And then we can go ahead and do so and use the controller to actually get that message by ID and return the fetch message and then do some kind of expectations. And then so on and so forth, right? We're skipping over a lot of lines here, but same thing. In the next test, we're just going to mock a resolve value, whatever we need, possibly, mock a different resolve value, for example, undefined, and go on. So a lot of this is just replacement inside of the existing tests that we're using that storage agent with now the mock. So you can see why it's a little bit easier. We're more accepting of this large amount of file changes, right? Especially since this replacement has already been done once or twice. Once the initial one kind of to prove that this works, and then the following ones is just the cookie cutter work, right? And so on and so forth. So the rest of the files after this are just going to be kind of like a repetition of that. There are some small other changes that he's done related to this, which, for example, inside of the actual controllers, returning the particular DTO rather than returning void. So all things have some kind of DTO that's being returned. And then if we take a look at another message command handler, or just a message command handler, we have some replacement of, let's see, this storage agent, update, BPI message. Oh, so here was just missing a mapper. So usually we will contain most of the PRs to, in particular, what you're working on and not outside that scope. It is common, though, if somebody notices that something is missing, kind of one of our tried and true, like we all follow these practices we've agreed to inside the repo. Generally, it's fine for them to fix that. So a mapper was missing here and it was formatted. Here we have another controller spec. So now we've gotten to another testing file for a controller. You're going to see the similar changes, right? Mock deep mock proxy, kind of changing from the storage agent, the mock storage agent, to the deep mock proxy, using the mock deep values, creating before each whatever values are needed, in this case, BPI subject accounts, and then the same thing we saw in the last spec for the message controller. Let's mock some rejected values or mock some values that we need, and then do the expectations, essentially replacing the storage agent. So you get the gist there. If you want to go ahead and look through, and you have time, you can look through all of the different comments, conversations we've had on this. This is kind of a leftover task from milestone 3 of cleaning up, this type of original mock storage agent that was just a way to, like allow us to have those tests running without doing kind of heavy implementation, without spending a lot of time upfront on that. And now we're just putting that time in on the back end. We have this extend process inbound message command handler. So another PR here from Ogden. So we take a look at this one. It introduces a BPI message transaction type and additional infrastructure that enables triggering of a command to create a BPI transaction from a NATS incoming message. So I think at this point, the NAS messaging server is working, but there was a kind of a missing connection between an incoming message and a BPI kind of transaction or progression that'll happen inside of the BPI. We want this incoming message, some incoming messages, to automatically kind of proc a particular type of transaction or advancement protocol, and that seems to be what he is working on here. Let's take a look real quick and see some of the changes he's made. So simple stuff here. He's just replacing the full ID and from or the full from and to of the, in this case, I'm guessing it's taking a BPI subject to just only passing through the ID, right? Let's not pass through the whole object if we don't need it. Just the ID is fine. Kind of being more restrictive on what is acceptable inside of those routes. You only accept exactly what you need. So here's the corresponding change of passing in the from subject ID to subject ID. Altering the test that corresponds to those messages. Here we have the messaging agent itself. So a change in the messaging agent, adding some extra kind of checks and balances. If this is an info type of message, execute and deal with this, deal with it with this command, or process inbound BPI message command. And if it is of type of a transaction message, so now that we're trying to connect these layers with, if a certain type of message comes through, that there should be an automatic command execution or progression of the BPI. Well, then we're gonna have to identify what is the type of that message, and how is it separate from another message. So an info message might not actually automatically, although it does execute a command here. That command is just a messaging functionality, versus if it's a transaction message, then there should automatically be this transaction that's set off through, in this case, the transaction command. Looks like some more logic here of how to deal with that incoming raw message, parsing it. If it's of this not info type or transaction message, then we're going to push some errors into a kind of collection errors that eventually will all be returned. And a nice to do here, right? So it's not uncommon to leave to-dos in our PRs, especially as they're getting bigger, right? Easier to understand and swallow. Now I know when I look at this, all right, we're going to perform some additional transaction validation once another number is done, right? Maybe to understand what type of validation needs to be done, this other issue 669, has to be completed. But at least I know, all right, when I'm going through this and saying, all right, well, it looks like we're missing some validation, as I'm imagining all the validation that can be done, but I see this message, and that way we can kind of skip over the whole lengthy conversation of all the maintainers telling everybody, well, these are all the different validations. We can separate that topic to its own PR later, and it's new. I won't go through all of these, but you can imagine it's something very similar. It's now dealing with this new type of separation of messages of info versus transaction, and how to deal with a transaction. I think the last one here is one by me, which I still have to work on updating this. Essentially, I did an original implementation for Merkle Tree CRUD. To start off milestone at the beginning of milestone 4, and then we engage in more of a proper discussion of exactly in the SR use case. We've kind of scanned over this document before in previous presentations of what Merkle abilities will be needed Will we be using kind of sparse Merkle trees for, what part of the BRI, or regular Merkle trees, so on and so forth, right? So this was the original implementation here, which just under the hood gives the CRUD abilities that you would need for a Merkle tree. You can create a Merkle tree, you can kind of update, you can read that, you can delete it, so on and so forth. But given the discussion that we've had, I will be updating this and then pushing a new PR. We'll need the abilities for sparse Merkle trees and non-sparse Merkle trees, and we need to be able to, in this case, persist them both in the database. So I'll be adding, this is just the normal Merkle tree implementation. I'll be adding the sparse Merkle tree implementation. And of particular interest is the hash algorithm we'll be using with the Merkle tree. In this case, we want to use one that is compatible with the ZK circuit. So I'm working on creating the Merkle tree with a MEMC hash algorithm. And then addressing, of course, the comments here, right? Here's a good one. Let's see, where's a good comment here. It looks like Ogden actually just left some new comments that I haven't seen. That's why they're all blank. So good to know. But there was one, just to give you an example, the type of thing you might see. Oh, right. So in this case, inside of the function for update the Merkle tree and probably create the Merkle tree, there's a hash helper that's like a kind of an anonymous function here, arrow function that's just part of the logic. And Monique noticed that this is kind of a duplicate piece of code, although it's a small duplicate piece of code. Why not pull it out and have its own function so it can be just called in multiple places? And this is kind of the types of discussions we'll have here. Well, right now that duplicate code is only in 2 places as a short 1 or 2 liner anonymous. So is it necessary to pull it out and give this its own, function set? Probably, because it's needed in what will become, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 different areas. So I just automatically agreed to this, right? If it was not so, then maybe there would be some ensuing discussion of, well, why pull it out to its own if we know it's only going to contain to these 2 places, so on and so forth, something like that, right? And then Ogden asking me to refactor something. All right. So those are all the pieces of the current PRs that are here. Merkle tree CRUD and ZK are probably more true milestone 4-ish. Removing these storage, this is something from the backlog, although it's definitely necessary. It doesn't really fall within the work of exactly any milestone. It just kind of falls within the adjacent good clean practices of kind of coding and testing that comes with the work we had to do for all the milestones running up whenever we for example, in milestone 3 or doing something like the message controller, you're going to have the testing suite for that, just for good coding practices. And because we have the testing suite, so we're going to use in this case Jest to kind of mock those underlying values, rather than just use some file that we created that we know it needs to return, so on and so forth, or whatever values based on what the controller is returning. So some of these PRs are just a result of kind of good practices from previous work or even current work inside the normal milestone. And yeah, so that's all the work we have going on right now. If there's any questions, feel free to ask now. Feel free to message me. Feel free to get involved. Come and join the group. We meet on Thursdays in the morning. I think it's 9-10 Eastern time, right? 9 Central.
10 Eastern, 9 Central. Yep.
Anybody can join. We've had a couple people join, do a couple of issues, drop out, or even just join up and stay in. Even if you don't want to code, you can still join in, see our process, and review the code if you're learning, so on and so forth. And yeah. Any questions from anybody here in the meeting, or? No? All right. I guess I'll be passing it back to whoever is in control of things.
Do we talked about like the looking into Polygon ID to integrate that into BRI3 as the
We haven't talked about any interop issues or kind of interop more related issues. So I think we were saving that for its own portion of where we're going to go through all the most recent interop stuff, and we can probably address it there. It's probably better there.
Okay.
But great segue.
Yeah. Thanks for walking us through all that. Andreas, would you be able to spend some time talking us through the recent developments in the interop work group and the use case?
Sure. I'm happy to. So just a reminder for those of you who are not yet familiar or coming back in. So the interop working group is targeting an interoperability demonstration in December of this year. The working group has selected a use case, which is very common, that occurs amongst businesses and banks, or between businesses and banks all the time, which is synchronization of banking data, which is obviously very sensitive data and therefore must be handled with great care. So the interop use case is to synchronize banking data from an ERP system with banking data at a bank, which means a customer of company A, of Acme, wants to update their banking data with the company because they have either switched banks or they have updated account, or they have updated their the bank address, etc. So normally what would happen, that customer to Acme Corporation would have to come with a bank letter that that customer would have to get from their bank with the update with the correct information, and then because the bank would never give it to Acme directly, so it's very cumbersome for the customer and for the bank to do it, but it happens all the time. So in this interop use case, we have the customer and Acme on the one side, operating on a baseline protocol implementation, and the bank and the auditor of the bank on the other side. And what is being done is that a synchronization request is done in Zero Knowledge that says this set of banking data, without sharing the banking data, is that the correct set of banking data for this customer? And using Zero Knowledge proofs, it's possible to do that. And what we're doing here is that the BPI, the business protocol implementation for the customer, and Acme is in fact a workgroup participant in the BPI of the auditor and the bank, and the other way around. The BPI, or the work group of the BPI from the bank and the auditor, is in fact a participant in the work group of the customer and Acme. This is how we're integrating it, and then we're just basically sending messages back and forth, transactions that are proving the state changes from proposed state, here's the banking data, this is correct, to saying yes, this is correct, and then finalizing the update on the customer and Acme side in the ERP system. And that's at a high level, non-technical level, use case that we're doing. Obviously, this does not require the customer to go to their bank, doesn't require the bank to issue a banking letter. It is just, it comes down to issuing and then verifying zero knowledge proofs, and on both sides in the two different BPIs, and that's it. The fun part is we're using DID, so decentralized identifiers, and the last thing that we talked about after we have established the use case and walked through all the interoperability requirements in the standard and determined how the implementations are going to meet them, we're now at the level of, okay, so how are we doing the what are we using for identification? How are we going to do authentication? And we have settled that. Well, settle it to the point that this is going to be our approach. There are probably going to be some changes that's required, which is brings us to Polygon ID, who presented last week on the baseline show. They have a ready-made tool set that allows one to integrate DIDs very effectively with wallets such as MetaMask, as well as with other systems such as a BPI or a blockchain.
Or SAP.
Or SAP. That's very true, right?
It's that blend. It's, DIDs are like that blending of like the Web 2, Web 3 world in terms of credentials, right? Where that's your shared identifier, between those two worlds, right? Where the operations you're doing on chain reflect some level of status that you have elsewhere in like Web 2 systems, such as like supply chain systems or SAP or ServiceNow or something like that, right?
Yes.
And this use case is such a good one, right? Because I think it's one that helps bridge some greater understanding of like an actual business use case, a problem that businesses have, is with the fraud in payments without blockchains at all, right? Is dealing with this fraud issue and how to apply zero knowledge there. It's actually an issue that gets even worse with blockchains, right? Because of the lack of reversibility in payments, right? So if you ever do go on chain for CBDCs or stable coins, you actually need this problem to be solved, right? So it's a lasting use case in my view.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. The fun part is that it is by now, the technologies around the DID standards have matured to the point where you can now integrate X509 certificates, which are common on the enterprise side, with DIDs by simply linking the public keys and the certificate to the DID, and then being able to integrate both the DID as well as an X509 within a JSON Web Token, for example. So this is the blending of the two worlds. And the nice thing about DIDs is you don't need to sort of like keep them on file, so to speak, all that information, because the different methods take care of that for everybody else. You just need the DID in order to figure all the things out that you need to know about critical key relationships and delegation capabilities and endpoints that are available for access through specific DID. So it is a relatively thin layer that needs to be added on top of existing systems in order to create these authentication, access controls, and identity layers that enable interoperability. So and what we're doing is a great usage of that of those technologies that have been built, such as Polygon ID, which by the way supports multiple different DIT methods, which therefore integrates a lot of technologies that have been built there. So it's a nice thing to have contributed to the ecosystem.
And the great thing about DIDs too is that the DID standard is specified, right? It's standardized, right? Across, because even if you did use a decentralized ID provider other than Polygon ID, as long as they follow the standard, you get the same results, right?
Exactly.
In terms of that. And it's, even though Polygon is in the name, it doesn't necessarily silo you to the Polygon ecosystem. You could do it to another L2 or different blockchain entirely, right? That's the idea there as well, I believe.
Yeah, they're supporting many DID methods. So whether that's not only like DID Ether or their own DID method, but they're supporting like DID Ion, DID Elements, Sovereign, DID Web, DID Key. So it's like a lot of like on-chain based DID methods as well as off-chain DID methods. So yeah, it's just a great flexible tool set, which is basically just a software development kit for it to be able to integrate this sort of like identity interoperability layer more easily. And they were generous to do it, and because it's a lot of work. And they're also doing a lot of stuff around that now in zero knowledge, especially on chain, which is tricky. So that's difficult, and the end of the road hasn't been reached there. There's a lot more to do. So we should actually take that out. Yeah, we should actually cut that out and send to Polygon, and it was like a Polygon commercial, at least Polygon e-commercial. But it's a good use of open source software in this case, and makes now interoperability much easier. And then coming back to like what, and then we talked about, we're now at the point where we are specifying actually the messages that are going to be the interoperability messages that are going to be sent back and forth. So what is going to be the JSON object? What's the schema that we're going to use, and values and so forth. So this is we're at that point. So that's the next step in the for the working group over the next couple of weeks. Hopefully by the end of the month we should have all of that. We should have all of that done.
Yeah, I know there's been some code samples, Postman collections, docs, other things we kind of shared through the BPI interop Slack channel. It's where I think we're at the point we're just gonna organize it back to the repo at this point, and put a fine-tooth comb through everything and figure out what makes sense, what needs a little more work yet in the year to come.
That is correct. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Anybody who wants to participate, please do. We're meeting Fridays, 7 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. GMT. So please join. Right, the link, the meeting link is pinned. So please join.
I would add too on the BRI1 side as well. Like there's there's some sample code already ready to go there. So if we have interested people people interested in participating in the BPI interop as a company, we have some SAP code that you can try out this particular use case with already today, just simply with BRI1. But we'll advance it further with interop here as well.
Awesome. Any other updates or topics that people want to discuss?
Yeah, may as well update on kind of what's been going on my end. I've been talking with various, I guess we mentioned the IUCRC thing in private channels. I don't know if I've mentioned it live, but there's a group that's like an industry university collaboration through the NSF called IUCRC. And I've been working a lot with University of Cincinnati, and they've been given the green light to join on with Smart Supply Chain IUCRC that is with Georgetown and Notre Dame. And we've had a lot of interest in kind of the baseline solution for multi-party, obviously multi-party zero trust and zero knowledge is kind of the selling point. So integration of various other upstream smart technologies, how are they locked down? So it's pretty elementary compared to some of the stuff that's been worked on here. I think just start out with some VIP stuff and maybe IoT sensor controls for some sort of encoded MSA execution logic, but that's slowly but surely working its way through kind of the bureaucratic process. And again, there's been some really cool interest there. So definitely looking forward to pushing that into kind of a larger collaborative and open source research endeavor between industries and a couple of academic institutions to discover kind of where some business value lies for some of those partners. But yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for the update. All right. Any follow-ups to what Jack shared or other updates, recent news you came across that's relevant to what we're doing or anything like that before we wrap?
Not really.
All right. That is fine. I think we're all busy with what we're working on, and we'll have updates as we have future shows and general assemblies. I'm working on our guests for the next few weeks, so hopefully we have a decent lineup. If you have any suggestions on groups to bring to the show or individuals as thought leaders, please let me know. And have a great rest of the week, everybody. Thank
Thanks
you.
all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Cheers.